The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Sarah Martinez adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. She had been tracking the group of armed militants for 2 days through the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The radio crackled to life in her ear, breaking the silence of the dawn. Eagle Eye, this is Command. We have visual confirmation of 8 tangos in the valley below your position. Repeat. 8 confirmed hostile targets. Sarah pressed her lips together as she peered through her scope. The Rangers had been right in their count. 8 men, all armed with assault rifles, had taken up positions around what appeared to be a small village. Intelligence reports suggested they were planning an attack on the nearby coalition base. But more importantly, they had taken several local villagers hostage. The 26-year-old sniper had been deployed to this remote outpost 6 months ago. Born and raised in rural Texas, she had grown up hunting with her father and grandfather. What started as weekend trips to shoot deer had evolved into something much more significant. Her natural talent with a rifle had caught the attention of military recruiters during her college years. Sarah remembered the day she first held a sniper rifle during basic training. The instructor, a grizzled sergeant with 20 years of experience, had watched skeptically as she took her position. Women in combat roles were still relatively new, and female snipers were even rarer. She had something to prove, not just to him, but to herself. Her first shot that day had hit the target dead center at 400 meters. The second shot, at 600 meters, had been even better. By the end of the week, she was outperforming most of the male recruits in her unit. The sergeant had approached her afterward, his expression having changed from skepticism to respect. "You have a gift, Martinez," he had said. "Don't waste it." Now, lying on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, Sarah felt the weight of that gift and the responsibility it carried. Through her scope, she could see the villagers huddled together near one of the buildings. An elderly man, a woman with 2 small children, and several teenagers. They looked terrified. The militants moved with the confidence of men who believed they controlled the situation. Their leader, a tall man with a distinctive red headscarf, gestured toward the hostages while speaking into a radio. Sarah could not hear his words, but his body language suggested he was making demands. Command had been clear about the mission parameters. The hostages were the priority. A direct assault by ground forces would likely result in civilian casualties. Air support was not an option due to the proximity of the innocent villagers. It would come down to precision shooting from her position. Sarah checked her equipment one more time. Her rifle, a customized M24 sniper weapon system, had been her constant companion for the past 2 years. She knew its characteristics better than she knew her own heartbeat. The wind was minimal, less than 5 miles per hour from the southwest. The range to the targets varied from 400 to 700 meters. The radio crackled again. "Eagle Eye, we need those hostiles neutralized before they can execute their plan. Ground team is in position but cannot move without risking civilian casualties. You are cleared to engage at your discretion." Sarah took a deep breath and settled into her shooting position. Her father had taught her that shooting was 90% mental preparation and 10% physical execution. She began to slow her breathing, finding the natural rhythm that would allow her to fire between heartbeats. The first target was positioned behind a low wall, partially concealed but still presenting a clear shot. He was approximately 450 meters away, slightly to her left. Sarah adjusted her scope and found him in her crosshairs. He was young, probably no more than 20. But the AK-47 inches, his hands, and his proximity to the hostages made his age irrelevant. She squeezed the trigger gently, the way her grandfather had taught her to squeeze a ripe peach. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and through the scope, she saw the man fall. The other militants immediately began looking around, trying to determine where the shot had come from. Chaos erupted in the valley below. The remaining 7 men took cover, while shouting to each other in Arabic. The hostages were pushed closer together, with 2 militants using them as human shields. Sarah knew she had to work quickly before they regrouped and possibly began executing civilians. Her second target had taken cover behind a wooden cart. Only his shoulder and part of his head were visible. It was a difficult shot, requiring precise placement to avoid hitting the cart and deflecting the bullet. Sarah adjusted for the slight upward angle and fired. Another clean hit. The militants were now frantically searching the mountainside, firing randomly at rock formations and shadows. Their panic was working in Sarah's favor, making them careless and exposing them to her shots. But it also increased the danger to the hostages, who were being dragged from cover to cover. Target number 3 made the mistake of exposing himself while trying to get a better firing position. Sarah's bullet found him before he could settle into his new location. The shot echoed across the valley, followed by the distinctive crack of the bullet breaking the sound barrier. By now, the remaining 5 militants had realized they were dealing with a sniper. Their leader was pointing in different directions, trying to coordinate a response. But their position in the valley worked against them. Sarah had the high ground and multiple angles of fire. The 4th man fell while attempting to move the hostages to a more secure location. Sarah's shot was taken at nearly 700 meters, at the extreme range of her rifle's effective distance. But years of practice and her natural skill made the shot seem effortless. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Sarah prepared for the next phase of what was becoming a deadly game of hide and seek. 4 targets remained, and they were getting smarter about using cover. The real challenge was just beginning. The remaining 4 militants had learned from their fallen comrades' mistakes. They moved differently now, using the buildings and natural rock formations more effectively. Sarah watched through her scope as they communicated with hand signals, their leader directing them into better defensive positions. She shifted slightly on the rocky ground, feeling the stones dig into her elbows through her protective gear. The morning was getting warmer, and she could feel sweat beginning to form under her tactical vest. But discomfort was something she had learned to ignore during her training. Focus was everything. The militant leader had positioned himself behind a thick stone wall that provided excellent cover from her current angle. Only occasionally did small portions of his body become visible. Sarah knew that taking him out would likely demoralize the others, but she needed a clear shot. Meanwhile, the hostages remained clustered near the center of the small village square. The elderly man appeared to be trying to calm the children, who were crying from fear. Sarah's jaw tightened as she watched one of the militants roughly push the woman when she tried to comfort her kids. Her radio buzzed softly. Eagle Eye. Ground team reports movement in Sector 7. Looks like reinforcements might be heading your way. Timeline just got shorter. Sarah acknowledged the transmission with 2 quick clicks on her radio. Reinforcements changed everything. If more militants arrived, the situation could become impossible to manage. She needed to accelerate her timeline. Target number 5 presented himself when he attempted to reposition to get a better view of the mountainside. He had chosen a spot behind a damaged truck, thinking the metal would provide adequate protection, but Sarah had noticed a gap between the truck bed and the cab. When he moved into position, his torso became visible for just a moment. The shot required perfect timing and placement. Sarah controlled her breathing and waited. When the militant leaned forward to peer around the truck's front end, she fired. The bullet passed through the gap she had identified and found its mark. 3 militants remained, but they were the smartest and most experienced of the group. The leader had managed to work his way to a position behind the village's small mosque, using its thick walls for protection. The other 2 had taken positions that provided mutual support while minimizing their exposure. Sarah realized she needed to change her own position to get better angles on her remaining targets. Moving during an active engagement was risky. It would expose her to return fire and potentially give away her location. But staying put would allow the militants to keep using their current cover indefinitely. She carefully gathered her equipment and began a slow crawl along the rocky ridge. Every movement was calculated to avoid creating a silhouette against the sky or causing loose rocks to tumble down the mountainside. The process was painstakingly slow, but stealth was crucial. As she moved, Sarah's mind drifted briefly to her training instructor's words about patience being a sniper's greatest weapon. She had learned to wait hours for the right shot, to endure discomfort and boredom while maintaining absolute focus. Those lessons were serving her well now. From her new position, approximately 100 meters to the east of her original spot, Sarah had a much better angle on the mosque. She could see portions of the leader that had been hidden before, but the shot would be challenging due to the distance and the need to thread the bullet between two stone columns. The sixth target eliminated was one of the remaining militants who made the mistake of trying to signal to someone outside the village. As he raised his arm to wave, his upper body became visible above the low wall he was using for cover. Sarah's response was immediate and precise. Now only the leader and one other militant remained. The leader had realized that his position behind the mosque was no longer secure. Sarah watched him signal to his remaining companion, apparently coordinating a new strategy. What happened next surprised even Sarah. Instead of seeking better cover, the two men began moving toward the hostages. Their intention was clear. They planned to use the civilians as human shields while attempting to escape the village. This development presented Sarah with her most challenging scenario yet. The militants were now intermingled with the hostages, making clean shots extremely difficult. Any mistake could result in civilian casualties, which was absolutely unacceptable. Sarah adjusted her scope to maximum magnification and studied the scene below. The leader was holding his rifle with one hand, while gripping the elderly man's shirt with the other. His companion had positioned himself behind the woman and children. Both militants were using the hostages as cover while scanning the mountainside for signs of the sniper. The radio crackled with an urgent transmission. Eagle Eye, satellite imagery shows a convoy of vehicles approaching from the north. Estimated arrival in 20 minutes. You need to wrap this up now. 20 minutes. Sarah knew that once reinforcements arrived, the situation would become exponentially more complex. She needed to end this engagement quickly, but not at the expense of innocent lives. She focused on the body language and movement patterns of the two remaining militants. People under extreme stress often developed unconscious habits and rhythms. The leader kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other every few seconds. His companion had a nervous tic of touching his weapon's safety with his thumb. These small, repeated movements could provide the split-second opportunities Sarah needed. She positioned her crosshairs and waited for the leader's next weight shift. When it came, he moved slightly away from the elderly hostage. The gap was minimal, perhaps 6 inches, but it was enough. Sarah's seventh shot was perhaps the most technically difficult of her career. Threading a bullet between hostage and captor at 600 meters required absolute precision, but her training and natural ability combined to make the impossible seem routine. The last militant panicked when his leader fell. He pushed the woman and children to the ground and began firing wildly in all directions. His shots were completely random, designed more to intimidate than to hit any specific target. Sarah watched calmly as he emptied his magazine in a display of frustrated rage. When he paused to reload, she was ready. Her eighth and final shot ended the engagement, just as the morning sun reached its peak in the Afghan sky. Silence settled over the valley like a heavy blanket after the last shot echoed off the rocky walls. Sarah remained motionless behind her rifle scope, watching the scene below through the magnified lens. The hostages were slowly getting to their feet, looking around in confusion and relief. The elderly man helped the woman gather her children, while the teenagers huddled together near the mosque wall. Eagle Eye, this is command. Confirm status of all targets. Sarah keyed her radio twice, then spoke quietly. Command. All 8 targets neutralized. Hostages appear unharmed and are mobile. Outstanding work, Eagle Eye. Ground team is moving in now to secure the area and provide assistance to the civilians. Sarah watched as the quick reaction force emerged from concealed positions around the village perimeter. She had not even known they were there, but their presence explained why command had been so confident about the timeline. The soldiers moved efficiently through the area, checking each fallen militant and securing their weapons. The medical team reached the hostages first. Sarah could see them examining the elderly man, who appeared to have sustained a minor injury during the ordeal. The woman was holding her children close while speaking rapidly to one of the soldiers who obviously spoke the local language. As the immediate crisis passed, Sarah began the methodical process of collecting her equipment. Each item had to be carefully packed and accounted for. Spent brass casings were policed up, not just for operational security but also for environmental responsibility. Even in a war zone, she maintained the discipline her instructors had drilled into her. The weight of what she had just accomplished was beginning to settle in. 8 precision shots in less than 2 hours, with 0 civilian casualties. It was the kind of performance that would be analyzed and studied in sniper schools for years to come. But for Sarah, it was simply another day doing the job she had been trained to do. Her radio crackled with a new voice. "Eagle Eye, this is Ranger 6. Wanted to personally thank you for that performance. Those people are going home to their families tonight because of your skill. Roger, Ranger 6. Just doing my job." But even as she spoke those words, Sarah knew this engagement had been different. The complexity of the target array, the proximity of hostages, and the time constraints had pushed her abilities to their limits. She had performed flawlessly under conditions that would have challenged even the most experienced snipers. As she made her way down from the rocky outcrop, Sarah's mind turned to the practical aspects of the mission aftermath. There would be debriefings, reports to write, and equipment to clean and maintain. The military bureaucracy never stopped. Regardless of how successful an operation might be, the descent from her shooting position took nearly an hour. The rocky terrain was treacherous, and she had to be careful not to slip while carrying her equipment. The temperature had risen significantly since dawn, and she could feel the heat beginning to affect her performance. When she finally reached the village, the scene was much different than it had been through her rifle scope. Up close, she could see the damage from the brief firefight. Bullet holes marked several buildings, and the militants' weapons lay scattered where they had fallen. The elderly hostage approached her as she entered the village square. He was a small man with weathered hands and kind eyes that reminded her of her grandfather. He spoke no English, but his message was clear as he took her hands in his and smiled while tears ran down his cheeks. One of the interpreters translated his words. "He says you are an angel sent by God to protect his family. He wants to know your name so he can pray for you." Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat. This was why she had joined the military, why she had endured the grueling training and the skeptical looks from male colleagues. Moments like this made all of the sacrifices worthwhile. "Tell him my name is Sarah, and that I was honored to help his family." The interpreter conveyed her message, and the old man nodded solemnly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved wooden bird, pressing it into Sarah's palm. It was clearly handmade, probably by his own skilled fingers. "He made this for his granddaughter, but he wants you to have it as a token of gratitude." Sarah accepted the gift with both hands, following the protocol she had learned for showing respect in Afghan culture. The carved bird was beautiful, with intricate details that spoke to hours of patient work. She would treasure it forever. The unit's commanding officer approached as she finished speaking with the interpreter. Colonel James Harrison was a career infantry officer who had initially been skeptical about having a female sniper in his unit. That skepticism had vanished over the past 6 months, as Sarah had proven herself time and again. "Martinez, that was some of the finest shooting I've ever witnessed. 8 for 8 at extended range with hostages in close proximity. How do you feel?" Sarah considered the question carefully. How did she feel? Relieved that the hostages were safe, satisfied with her performance, grateful for the training that had prepared her for this moment, but also aware that 8 men were dead because of her actions, regardless of how justified those actions had been. "I feel good about the outcome, sir. The mission was successful, and innocent people are safe." Colonel Harrison nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right answer. Never forget that what we do here has consequences beyond the immediate tactical situation. Those hostages will go home tonight because you did your job with precision and professionalism." As the afternoon wore on, the village gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. The bodies of the militants had been removed, and engineers were already assessing the minor damage to buildings. Local authorities had been notified, and arrangements were being made to provide counseling support for the former hostages. Sarah found herself sitting in the shade of the mosque, cleaning her rifle with the methodical care that had become second nature. Each component was inspected, cleaned, and properly maintained. Her weapon was not just a tool. It was a precision instrument that required constant attention to perform at its peak. The radio chatter indicated that the suspected reinforcements had never materialized. Intelligence suggested that the convoy spotted on satellite imagery had been a false alarm, probably local farmers transporting goods to market. But the time pressure created by that report had added an extra layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. As evening approached, Sarah knew that the real work was just beginning. The mission would be thoroughly analyzed, from her shooting positions to the timing of each engagement. Every aspect would be studied to identify lessons learned and best practices for future operations. 3 weeks after the village engagement, Sarah sat in the command tent, reviewing intelligence reports about increased militant activity in the region. The success of her mission had apparently prompted enemy forces to change their tactics, avoiding open confrontations and moving to more heavily populated areas where civilian casualties would limit military responses. The carved wooden bird from the elderly hostage sat on her small desk, serving as a constant reminder of why precision and restraint were so important in her line of work. Every time she looked at it, she remembered the relief on the faces of the freed civilians and the weight of responsibility that came with her specialized skills. Colonel Harrison entered the tent carrying a folder marked with security classifications that indicated something significant was developing. His expression was serious, and Sarah immediately recognized the look that meant another challenging mission was about to be briefed. "Martinez, we've got a situation developing about 40 kilometers north of here. Intelligence indicates a high-value target has been located, but the circumstances are complicated." Sarah set down her coffee and gave the colonel her full attention. High-value targets usually meant senior militant leaders or bomb makers whose capture or elimination could significantly impact enemy operations in the region. The briefing revealed that surveillance had identified a man believed to be responsible for several improvised explosive device attacks that had killed coalition forces and civilians. The target had taken refuge in a compound that also housed several families, including women and children who were apparently being held against their will. "The target knows we're closing in," Colonel Harrison continued. "He's using the families as human shields, hoping we won't risk civilian casualties to get to him. Traditional assault methods are not viable given the presence of innocents." Sarah studied the satellite photographs and reconnaissance images spread across the table. The compound was well fortified, with high walls and multiple buildings that provided numerous hiding places. The target had chosen his refuge carefully, making any conventional attack extremely risky for the civilian hostages. "What's the timeline, sir?" "Intelligence suggests he's planning to move tomorrow night under cover of darkness. If he reaches the mountain caves to the east, we'll lose him for months, maybe permanently. This might be our only chance." The mission parameters were similar to the village engagement but significantly more complex. The target was known to have at least 6 armed associates, all experienced fighters who would not panic like the younger militants she had faced before. The compound's layout, limited shooting angles, and the proximity of civilians made precision absolutely critical. Sarah spent the rest of the day studying every available piece of intelligence about the target and his location. Architectural drawings obtained from local sources showed that the compound had been built around a central courtyard, with residential areas on 3 sides and a workshop area on the 4th. The families were reportedly being held in the residential sections, while the target and his associates had set up defensive positions throughout the compound. This arrangement meant that any engagement would require careful coordination to avoid endangering the innocent occupants. As darkness fell, Sarah began her preparation ritual. Equipment was checked and double-checked. Her rifle was cleaned and calibrated. Ammunition was selected based on the specific requirements of urban engagement with hostage considerations. Each round was inspected individually for any defects that might affect accuracy. The insertion would be different this time. Instead of a long-range mountain position, she would be deploying much closer to the target area. A damaged building approximately 300 meters from the compound would provide the necessary elevation and concealment for the engagement. The approach to the shooting position took place during the darkest hours before dawn. Sarah moved with a small reconnaissance team that would provide security and communications support during the operation. Their movement was slow and careful, avoiding detection by enemy sentries and electronic surveillance. The abandoned building had been damaged by artillery fire months earlier, leaving it structurally unsafe but still providing adequate cover for a sniper position. Sarah established her shooting position in what had once been a third-floor bedroom, with a clear view of the target compound. Through her night vision scope, she could see the guards posted around the compound perimeter. They moved in predictable patterns, changing positions every hour in a rotation that suggested professional training. The target himself remained invisible, probably sheltering in one of the interior buildings. As dawn approached, activity in the compound increased. Sarah could see civilians moving between buildings, apparently performing daily tasks under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Children played in the courtyard while women hung laundry and prepared food. The normalcy of these activities made the presence of armed militants even more disturbing. The radio crackled with updates from reconnaissance teams positioned around the compound. Eagle Eye. We have positive identification on the primary target. He's in the northeast building. Second floor. Multiple associates visible throughout the compound. Sarah adjusted her scope to focus on the building indicated. Through a second-floor window, she could see a figure that matched the photographs in the intelligence briefing. The target was speaking on a radio, probably coordinating with other militant cells in the region. But getting a clear shot would require patience and precise timing. The target rarely exposed himself for more than a few seconds at a time, and there were always civilians in the background who could be endangered by a miss or over-penetration. The first opportunity came when the target moved to a window to observe something in the courtyard below. Sarah had a clear shot for approximately 3 seconds before he moved back into the interior, but a child was playing directly below the window, and the angle was such that a missed shot could endanger the innocent. She held her fire and continued to wait. Patience was indeed a sniper's greatest weapon, and the lives of innocent people depended on her discipline and restraint. The second opportunity came an hour later when the target stepped onto a small balcony to smoke a cigarette. The shot was feasible, but one of his associates was standing close enough that the same bullet could potentially hit both men. Given the urban environment and the presence of civilians, such precision was necessary to prevent unintended casualties. Sarah controlled her breathing and found her natural aiming point. The target was relaxed, apparently believing himself safe behind the compound walls. He had no idea that a trained sniper was watching his every movement from 300 meters away. When he moved slightly to flick ash from his cigarette, the angle changed just enough to eliminate the risk to his associate. Sarah squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she had used in the village engagement. The bullet crossed the distance in less than a second, ending the career of a man responsible for the deaths of countless innocent people. The compound erupted in confusion as the associates realized their leader had been killed. But instead of mounting an organized defense, they began abandoning their positions and fleeing the area. The psychological impact of losing their leader, combined with their inability to locate the sniper, had broken their will to fight. 6 months later, Sarah found herself back in Texas, sitting across from a Pentagon interviewer in a sterile conference room. Her deployment had ended with commendations and recommendations for advanced training, but the transition back to civilian life was proving more challenging than any mission she had faced overseas. The interviewer, a middle-aged woman in uniform with multiple ribbons indicating extensive combat experience, reviewed the thick file containing Sarah's service record. The village engagement and the compound operation had been extensively documented and analyzed, becoming case studies for precision shooting in urban environments. Sergeant Martinez, your performance in theater has been exceptional. The precision and judgment you demonstrated in complex hostage situations represent the absolute pinnacle of sniper craft. We'd like to discuss your future with the program. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The formal recognition felt strange after months of simply doing her job without fanfare or celebration. She had joined the military to serve her country and protect innocent people, not to become a subject of academic study. The interviewer continued. We're developing new training protocols based on your engagements. The combination of precision shooting with hostage rescue techniques could revolutionize how we approach similar situations in the future. But Sarah's mind was elsewhere, thinking about the carved wooden bird sitting on her dresser back home and the faces of the people she had protected. The statistics and tactical analyses felt divorced from the human reality of what had happened in that Afghan village and the compound operation that followed. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her father, asking about her plans for the weekend. Simple, normal questions that reminded her how much her world had changed during her deployment. The gap between her military experiences and civilian life seemed to widen with each passing day. The interviewer was explaining opportunities for advanced schools and specialized assignments when Sarah's attention was drawn to a news report playing silently on the conference room television. The footage showed a humanitarian crisis developing in another part of the world, with civilians trapped between warring factions. "Ma'am, can you turn up the sound on that?" The news report detailed how aid workers were being prevented from reaching refugees who were caught in crossfire between rebel forces and government troops. The situation bore uncomfortable similarities to the scenarios Sarah had faced during her deployment, but on a much larger scale. After the interview concluded, Sarah drove to her family's ranch outside San Antonio. The familiar landscape of rolling hills and oak trees provided a sharp contrast to the Rocky Mountains and dusty villages of Afghanistan, but the peace and quiet that she had once found comforting now felt almost overwhelming. Her father was waiting on the front porch when she arrived, his weathered hands holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He studied her face with the knowing look of a man who had served in Vietnam decades earlier. "You've got that look, Sarah. Same one I had when I came back from Southeast Asia. The world keeps turning here, while everything changed over there." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the Texas countryside. Sarah found herself thinking about the elderly Afghan man who had given her the carved bird, wondering if he was safe and whether his family had been able to return to their normal lives. Her phone rang with a call from Colonel Harrison, now calling from his new assignment at the Pentagon. The conversation was brief but significant. He was putting together a new unit specifically designed to handle precision operations in complex environments. And he wanted Sarah to be part of the team. "The threats are evolving, Martinez. We need people with your skills and judgment to handle situations where traditional approaches won't work. Are you interested?" Sarah looked at her father, who nodded slightly as if he could read her thoughts. The decision wasn't difficult. There were people in the world who needed protection, and she had the skills to provide it. Her personal comfort was less important than the lives that might depend on her abilities. 3 weeks later, Sarah was back in uniform, this time at a training facility in North Carolina, where the new unit was being formed. The other members were all specialists in their fields: explosives experts, communications specialists, medics, and intelligence analysts who would work together on missions requiring surgical precision. The training was more intensive than anything she had experienced before. Scenarios involving hostage rescue, counterterrorism, and humanitarian intervention were practiced repeatedly until every team member could perform their role instinctively. The emphasis was on minimizing civilian casualties while achieving mission objectives that conventional forces couldn't accomplish. During a break between training exercises, Sarah received an unexpected package from Afghanistan. Inside was a letter, written in careful English by the interpreter who had helped during the village engagement, along with photographs of the family she had saved. The elderly man had passed away peacefully 6 months after the rescue, but not before telling his entire extended family about the female soldier who had protected them from harm. The photographs showed children playing in the same village square where the engagement had taken place, now peaceful and secure. The letter explained that the wooden bird Sarah had been given was not just a token of gratitude but a family heirloom that had been passed down through generations. By accepting it, she had become an honorary member of the family, with all the responsibilities and honors that entailed. That evening, Sarah called her mother for the first time since returning from deployment. The conversation was initially awkward. Her mother had worried constantly during the deployment and struggled to understand why her daughter had chosen such a dangerous profession. "I just don't understand why you have to be the one to do these things," her mother said. "There are other people who could take those risks." Sarah thought carefully before responding. "Mom, I have a gift that can save innocent lives. If I don't use it, people die who shouldn't. It's not about being a hero or seeking glory. It's about responsibility." The new unit's first mission came sooner than expected. A terrorist group had taken control of a school in an allied nation, holding more than 200 children and teachers hostage. Negotiation attempts had failed, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah found herself once again checking her equipment and preparing for a mission where precision would mean the difference between success and tragedy. But this time, she wasn't facing the challenge alone. She was part of a team specifically trained to handle exactly this type of scenario. As the transport aircraft carried them toward their destination, Sarah touched the carved wooden bird she now wore on a chain around her neck. It reminded her that her skills were not just about military tactics or personal achievement, but about protecting the innocent and standing between evil and those who couldn't protect themselves. The elderly Afghan man's faith in her abilities had been a gift as precious as the wooden bird itself. Now she would honor that faith by continuing to use her skills in service of others, no matter where in the world that service might be needed. 5 years after the Afghan village engagement, Sarah stood before a classroom of young soldiers at the Army's premier sniper school. The carved wooden bird sat prominently on her desk, now polished smooth from years of handling during moments of reflection and decision-making. The students before her were both male and female, representing a new generation of warriors who had grown up in a military where gender barriers were steadily falling. For them, the idea of a female sniper instructor was not unusual or remarkable. It was simply the reality of modern warfare. Precision shooting is only half of what we do, Sarah told the class as she began her lecture. The other half is judgment. Knowing when to take the shot and when to hold your fire is what separates a sniper from someone who just happens to be good with a rifle. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation, showing a satellite image of the Afghan village where her career had been defined. The students leaned forward, recognizing that they were about to hear a first-hand account of one of the most studied engagements in modern sniper doctrine. On this day, 8 armed militants had taken hostages in a remote village. The Rangers counted 8 targets, and command authorized me to neutralize each one. But the count was only the beginning of the challenge. Sarah walked through the engagement methodically, explaining not just the technical aspects of each shot, but the decision-making process that had guided her actions. She emphasized the constant evaluation of civilian safety, the importance of patience, and the weight of responsibility that came with the power of life and death. One student raised her hand. "Ma'am, how do you deal with the psychological impact of taking lives, even when it's justified?" Sarah paused, considering her answer carefully. It was a question she had wrestled with for years, and one that deserved complete honesty. "You never stop feeling the weight of it," she replied, "but you learn to carry that weight in service of a greater purpose. Every life I took was in defense of innocent people who couldn't defend themselves. That doesn't make it easy, but it makes it bearable." The classroom fell silent as the students absorbed the gravity of her words. Sarah picked up the wooden bird from her desk, turning it over in her hands as she had done countless times before. "This was given to me by a man whose family I helped save that day. He carved it for his granddaughter but chose to give it to me instead. It reminds me every day that our actions have consequences beyond the immediate tactical situation." Somewhere in Afghanistan, children grew up safe because of what happened in that village. Another student, a young man from rural Montana, asked about the technical challenges of the engagement. Sarah smiled, recognizing the same hunger for knowledge that had driven her own development as a marksman. "The longest shot was nearly 700 meters, at the edge of my rifle's effective range. But distance was only one factor. Wind, elevation, target movement, and most importantly, the proximity of hostages all had to be calculated for each engagement." She moved to the whiteboard and began sketching the village layout from memory. Each building, wall, and potential cover position was drawn with the precision that had made her famous among military strategists worldwide. The key was controlling the engagement tempo. I couldn't allow the militants time to regroup or harm the hostages, but I also couldn't rush shots and risk civilian casualties. Each target had to be carefully selected based on threat level and shooting opportunity. As the class progressed, Sarah shared lessons that extended far beyond marksmanship. She spoke about the importance of physical conditioning, mental preparation, and the ability to function under extreme stress. But most importantly, she emphasized the ethical responsibility that came with their chosen profession. "You will be given the power to end lives from distances where your targets cannot even see you. That power must never be used lightly or carelessly. Every trigger pull must be justified, not just tactically, but morally." During the lunch break, Sarah walked to the base memorial garden where names of fallen soldiers were engraved on black granite walls. She found the section dedicated to her unit's casualties from Afghanistan and placed her hand on the name of Sergeant Mike Williams, a spotter who had been killed by an improvised explosive device 2 months after her village engagement. Mike had been scheduled to work with her on several missions, and his death had affected her deeply. He was just 23 years old, with a new wife back home and dreams of becoming a police officer after his military service. The randomness of warfare had taken him while sparing her, a fact that still haunted her quiet moments. That afternoon's class focused on the compound mission, where she had eliminated the high-value target. The students studied the tactical decisions involved in urban shooting, where backgrounds and overpenetration became critical considerations. In the village, I had clear sight lines and minimal risk of unintended targets. The compound was completely different. Every shot had to account for what was behind the target, what was to the sides, and who might be endangered by fragments or ricochet. She explained how the mission had required a different mindset entirely. Instead of engaging multiple targets in sequence, she had waited hours for a single, perfect opportunity. The patience required had tested her resolve, but the stakes demanded nothing less than perfection. A student asked about fear and how she managed it during combat operations. Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. Fear is natural and healthy. It keeps you alert and focused. The goal isn't to eliminate fear but to control it and use it to your advantage. Fear makes you check your equipment twice. Fear makes you consider every angle before taking a shot. Fear keeps you alive and keeps innocent people safe. The final portion of the class covered the evolution of her career from a single sniper working alone to leading teams in complex operations. Sarah described how the lessons learned from her early engagements had been incorporated into new training protocols and tactical procedures. No one operates in isolation anymore. Modern threats require coordinated responses from specialists working together. The sniper is just one part of a larger team, but our role remains critical in situations where precision is more important than firepower. As the day ended, several students approached Sarah with personal questions about career progression and specialized assignments. She recognized the ambition and dedication in their eyes, remembering her own eagerness to prove herself in those early days. One young woman asked specifically about the challenges of being female in a traditionally male profession. Sarah's answer was direct and honest. You'll have to prove yourself every day, sometimes multiple times to the same people. But excellence speaks louder than prejudice. Focus on being the best soldier you can be, and let your performance do the talking. That evening, Sarah video called the interpreter from Afghanistan, who had become a lifelong friend. His English had improved dramatically over the years, and he now worked with international aid organizations helping other displaced families. The village school was rebuilt last year, he told her with obvious pride. 43 children attend classes there now, including 2 of the ones you saved that day. They have grown up hearing the story of the American woman who protected them. The conversation reminded Sarah why she had chosen to transition from active operations to training new snipers. Every student who passed through her classroom represented dozens of future lives that might be saved through proper training and ethical grounding. Before ending the call, her friend shared news that the elderly man's grandson had joined the Afghan National Army and was serving as a translator for coalition forces. The family's commitment to peace and stability continued across generations, inspired in part by the rescue they had witnessed years earlier. As Sarah prepared for sleep that night, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that morning in the Afghan mountains. The scared young soldier who had taken her first combat shots had evolved into a teacher and mentor, passing on not just technical skills, but wisdom earned through experience. The wooden bird sat on her nightstand, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. It remained her most treasured possession, a tangible reminder that individual actions could have far-reaching consequences. Somewhere in the world, children were growing up safe because of decisions made in split seconds under extreme pressure. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to shape the next generation of warriors. Sarah fell asleep knowing that her legacy would live on through the soldiers she trained, carrying forward the lessons of precision, judgment, and responsibility that had defined her career.